This time 4 years ago, consumers around the world were mere months away from playing a game that was for many one of the most anticipated of all time. For years, Square Enix had been tight-lipped about whether they would succumb to fan demand and produce a full-on high-definition remake of Final Fantasy VII. They themselves had stoked this demand when the Final Fantasy VII tech demo was unveiled at E3 2005. But that was never the intention. It was merely intended to be just that, a technical demo in the same vein as had been produced for prior console generations, with Final Fantasy VIII being the subject of their PlayStation 2 tech demo and Final Fantasy VI being used before that. They could never have imagined how much that video, which was less than 2 minutes long, would stoke the imagination. But for years, fans and journalists would continue to ask the question, when are you going to work on a Final Fantasy VII remake? On the 10th anniversary of the airing of that original tech demo, they got their answer. Square Enix stunned audiences with a small teaser trailer, and in relative terms, that small teaser broke the internet. Even now, over 8 years later, the Final Fantasy VII Remake E3 2015 trailer ranks as the 17th most watched video on the official PlayStation YouTube channel. But at the time of its publishing, every major reveal from that press conference was blown out of the water. Within a week, the trailer had been viewed almost 10 million times, and this was more than the combined views of lengthy press conference segments relating to Uncharted 4, The Last Guardian, and Horizon Zero Dawn. Days after the reveal, Tetsuya Nomura spoke to Japanese media outlets, and what he said in those interviews would be rather intriguing and foreboding. To Dengeki Online, he said, "We can't talk about the details yet, but it won't be a simple remake. If it were just about enhancing the graphics for current generation consoles, I don't think it would surpass the original version. If that were the case, you could just play the original international version on the PlayStation 4, and that would be enough." To Famitsu, he responded to a question about this being more than just a graphical update by saying, "Yes, and if we're doing a full remake, we must take a different approach and create something that suits the current era." Nomura also noted that the inclusion of Kazushige Nojima was purposeful, as even though there were elements of Final Fantasy VII that remained special and could never be surpassed, this new project would have new elements added to the story. Later that year, an action-centric gameplay trailer was showcased at the PlayStation Experience, and this was accompanied by a press release that confirmed the now-named Final Fantasy VII Remake would be a full remake of the original game that will be told across a multi-part series. This statement led to initial confusion that the game would be episodic, but Yoshinori Kitase would later clarify via an interview with Game Informer that each part would be a full-scale game, using the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy as an example of what they were looking to accomplish. It would just be bigger and better. Kitase also shared that since he, Nomura, and Nojima were central to the creation of the original game, nothing relating to the scenario of the remake would be untouchable. He also noted that even though fans may believe the opposite, that they would get the balance right between what should be changed versus what should be protected. 4 years later, fans would find out, for better or for worse, what that foreboding statement meant. In the many years Final Fantasy VII Remake spent in development, due to the marketing and the literal name of the game, there was a belief that the Final Fantasy VII Remake would be a faithful remake. It would feature an evolved combat system, yes, and the development team had spent time developing systems to accommodate for those who were not comfortable with action-focused gameplay. But the common perception was that even though small tweaks would be made, and there may be allusions to the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, there would be no major changes to the story. This expectation had also been set by similar games released by other companies, such as the Resident Evil 2 remake, the various Pokemon remakes such as Pokemon Heart Gold, and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D. Each was able to transport an old game into the modern era in a way that appealed to old fans looking to get a nostalgia fix and new fans looking to explore an older game but with a fresh lick of paint. The Final Fantasy VII Remake, as was found out upon release, would take a slightly different approach. large parts of the game would be incredibly faithful to the original. But as the game reached its conclusion, it became clear that there would also be fundamental changes. The Final Fantasy VII Remake was more akin to a reimagining, and this decision would have a profound impact on how people viewed the wider Final Fantasy VII Remake project. That then brings us onto Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Retelling an already told story and expanding on it in such an extreme manner is no easy feat, and it's clear that the main motivation for taking this approach has been to try and offer something new to those who played and enjoyed the original. Kitase has spoken many times about his desire to stoke curiosity and intrigue. Even though fans of the original may be confident that they knew how the story would play out, the events that transpired at the conclusion of Remake reset the playing field. They will still be at an advantage compared to newcomers, and they will be able to appreciate lots of the subtle or not so subtle storytelling elements. But both sets of the player base are now ignorant as to how the story will reach its conclusion. And as per Kitase's grand design, this has led to an explosion of theories being created as to how the story may evolve, and some of these theories have received hundreds of thousands of views. But this then points to the strengths of Rebirth and the merits of the bold approach they have chosen to take. They will be treading old paths as a way of creating new journeys. Everything we've seen so far from Rebirth suggests it will continue in a similar manner, serving as a reimagination of the original game but focused on a different part of the story. This was to be expected, but what wasn't to be expected, and this leans on the title of the video, is that Rebirth promises to be something much more, a grander game than could have ever been imagined. This assertion is based on promotional material and statements from the developers themselves, but it's also based on first-hand experience, as during a recent preview session, we were able to better explore Calm and the surrounding areas. Playing into the theme of old paths and new journeys, in Rebirth the party will end up in Calm, and after leaving this location, they will head to the Chocobo stables as they need transportation to help them venture through the perilous swamp to gain access to the Mithril mines. Their end destination is then Junon. It's the exact same path taken by the party in the original game, and the narrative follows the same story beats. But the journey between these destinations is now very different. And what we played epitomized why Rebirth has the potential to circumvent all kinds of expectations and separate itself away from preconceived notions that were born from its association with Remake. Initial evidence for this was delivered last September, as marketing beats focused on how the Nibelheim incident will be reimagined. In the original game, Sephiroth accompanied Cloud as they ventured up Mount Nibel to inspect the broken Mako reactor. This specific sequence was designed in a purposeful manner to show the power of Sephiroth in comparison to two separate iterations of Cloud. One as the inexperienced and youthful soldier first class who was a bit green around the ears, and two as the character we, as the player, had been control of up until that point in the game. To further emphasize this, the enemies being faced, based on either their individual stats or configurations, were designed to be fearsome and far beyond the standard enemy encountered so far. But control of Sephiroth was prohibited, and his damage output, which we had no influence over, was incredible by comparison. This sequence could have been left identical within Rebirth, but it wouldn't have made much sense. The assumption has to be that the majority of players will either be rusty, having not played Remake for some time, or that they are fresh into the experience, having not even played Remake. If the original design was replicated, both of these groups would have been forced into taking charge of a weakened Cloud and merely watched as Sephiroth trounced all opposition while they could barely make a dent. Some elements of that would have been quite fun had the segment been short, but with every aspect of Rebirth being expanded, the more likely outcome was that players would have started to feel underwhelmed. So the decision was taken to subvert expectations, and to do this, the player had to be given control of Sephiroth. Due to the sheer power of Sephiroth, should the player take control of the famed soldier, then many of the encounters have the potential to last mere seconds, and even the Materia Guardian can be melted by Sephiroth's relentless assault. In this regard, its impact is almost identical to the original game, as we are given a clear barometer for the power of Sephiroth. But the key word here is almost. Before this sequence, Sephiroth had never been playable within the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. By adjusting in this manner, it therefore serves as not just a fun and long-awaited moment, but it also serves as a potential tease for what's to come, as it fulfills the long-held criteria of giving the player immense power through Sephiroth and then having it taken away. That such a decision is there in such a bold and brazen manner stands to highlight the stark differences that exist between the original game, Remake, and then Rebirth. Perhaps the most impressive aspect is that this isn't just one cherry-picked moment. From what we've seen so far, either via footage released to the general public or from our own playthrough, the game is filled with countless sequences that represent the same ethos. And although the same could be said about Remake in comparison to the original game, it now feels even more purposeful. The same sentiment can be applied to creating a sense of depth to the world. The Final Fantasy VII Remake attempted this and succeeded in many ways. Original characters were created, existing characters had their backstories fleshed out, and compilation characters were integrated. It's clear that Rebirth would attempt to accomplish the same objective, but the manner through which this will be achieved seems to have been adjusted. There will, for example, be new characters introduced as a way of building out the narrative and wider lore. But their inclusion now feels more purposeful, albeit when viewed from a very narrow lens. Broden, who serves as the owner of the inn the party stay at in Calm, seems to have meaningful motivations that fuel his actions. The assumption is that these actions serve as a small tease, and that later in the game we'll be able to explore Broden's backstory in more detail. Who knows, maybe this will even relate to the infamous Calm incident, which was alluded to in the original game before being spoken about in great depth in Before Crisis. The other intriguing aspect in this regard comes with the party themselves. In Remake, there was a very subtle affinity mechanic at play, and this determined who Cloud spoke to during Chapter 14. Each of the options relating to this choice were either mandatory, such as choosing to accept or reject Aerith's flower, or signposted, such as either choosing to complete or skip various side quests. This time around, the relationships between the characters will have more depth, and this will not influence just the iconic date sequence, but also gameplay mechanics as well. Central to this is the newly introduced party level. In addition to each individual character level, the party level will represent the bond that exists between the party, and it can be increased by performing various world activities, some of which, it can be assumed, will involve specific party members. The premise is that the more time the party spends together, the more effective they will become as a team, and this is why the party level is linked to a new system called folios. Each character will have their own folio, which, in-game, seems to serve as some kind of personal diary of their adventure. With each folio, SP can be spent to unlock synergy abilities, synergy skills, abilities, wider abilities, and stat boosts. And these will not only increase the individual performance of that specific character, but also one or many other members of the party. United Focus, for example, is a synergy ability that can be found within Barrett's folio, and it specifically links him to Red 13. Iron Defense, on the other hand, is a synergy skill, and this can be used in conjunction with any other member of the party. Folios can be upgraded at specific shops like Magnata Books, but also out in the wild too, as a new folio vending machine now appears alongside the regular one. The other aspect centered around this relates to the interpersonal relationships each party member will develop with Cloud. At various points in the story, players will have the chance to seek out members of the party and engage in conversations. For example, after being given the freedom to explore Calm, Barrett can be found in the Rusty Arrow. What follows is a small piece of exposition and then a dialogue choice. And to add some urgency, and to stress test how players truly feel about characters, they must respond within a limited amount of time. No matter the response, Cloud's relationship with this character will then be influenced either positively or negatively, and general sentiment will then be shown above that character's head. It's unclear how detailed this particular mechanic will be, but it promises to add depth and replayability, and that appears to be the general theme. Remake featured a very detailed world. Everything found throughout was purposeful, with the creators even spending hours antagonizing about creating realistic train schedules, even though they knew very few people would take the time to check it out. But with Rebirth, that depth promises to go even further. There will be many optional dialogue sequences that players may not even realise they've missed. And it will only be through speaking with friends or watching other people play the game that they'll realise what they did miss out on. And in the case of Red 13 and his renaming partway through the game, as side quests can now be completed at almost any point during a playthrough, 2 sets of dialogue have been recorded. When you then layer in all the other elements, such as the copious amounts of minigames, each of which features an incredible level of depth, the expanded array of material available, and the promise of an even meatier campaign, it's clear that even though Rebirth is built on the same core model and premise as Remake, in many ways it's going to be nothing like its predecessor. And that is a pretty exciting prospect. Rebirth still has many questions to answer, however, and much of that will ride on whether the narrative choices made in Remake deliver this time around. The good thing is that the wait isn't too long, as in just a matter of weeks we will get to see firsthand whether the 4-year wait and the promise that has come with that wait will turn into something of real substance. But with that, we hope you enjoyed this preview of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Be sure to let us know in the comments below which aspect of Rebirth you're most excited to check out, and if you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, The Livestream, Gregory, Justin Dent and Sukun DDK, who are super special Onion Eye supporters. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.